Ladies and gentlemen, we are on a roll of building ridiculously attractive computers, and today is going to be no different, because we've actually got the brand new case from Hyte. You guys went absolutely ballistic for their previous case, the Y60, so I thought it'd only be fair to build the most attractive computer we can inside the brand new Y40 with some lovely MSI components to make a ridiculously fast gaming PC. Shall we show you a sneak peek of what this is going to look like? Just for a second. Editor Carl, go! That's all you get. That's all you get. But this thing is going to be insanely attractive. And of course, we'll be showing you the full build process, showing you the gameplays. You can see exactly how this thing performs. And of course, showing you the things we love and maybe the things that we don't. All that's left to say is an absolutely massive thank you to MSI for sponsoring this video. Let's get started. Let's begin by actually clearing ourselves some space. So when we actually pick this thing up, you can see what we're talking about. And the design language is actually very similar to the previous Y60, but the main difference is that this is more of a traditional sort of design rather than it being like a big sort of square, if you like, with a little like fish tank style edge on the side of it. This is a bit more like a tower rather than a cube, I suppose. But its core principle remains the same, which is to have loads of airflow, mainly actually from bottom to top, but still maintaining something that really looks like a show build. You've got the glass on the front and on the side, but with airflow pretty much everywhere else, you shouldn't be struggling for temperatures, even if you're putting really high-end components inside this. How easy is this to take apart? Well, it's completely toolless for the most part. This is where you put your radiator. Does the side panel just pop off? Maybe. What about the other side? Oh, the other side comes off. Very easy. But what about that glass? Okay, that is also toolless. It just lifts out like that. Something that is immediately obvious to me though is that you can't get the exact same airflow that you would have got in the Y60, because of course your power supply is going to be down here. So even if you do put fans in the bottom chamber, the amount of airflow you're going to get is going to be restricted. I'm not necessarily saying that's a huge problem, because you can put fans down here, but this is actually like a bit more of a solid floor down here at the bottom. If that was mesh, I guess that might make more sense. But at the moment, you don't really have as much airflow that can go up into the bottom chamber. I'm not sure if that's disappointing. We'll have to see a little bit later when we look at thermals. But if you want the absolute best sort of bottom to top philosophy, then you probably are going to want to go for the Y60. However, just like the Y60, every single one of these cases comes with this PCIe riser cable as standard, as this is very much meant to be used in that vertical GPU orientation. You don't have to, just be aware that if you're paying and actually getting a riser with it, then well, that's money that you're paying that you might not use if you don't want a vertical GPU. And speaking of the GPU, I think it's time to actually do ourselves a little unboxing of the 4070 Ti Gaming Trio from MSI. And I've actually been using MSI cards, I think, pretty much since I started PC gaming. I actually had two cards in SLI, and one of them was an MSI GTX 680. So I've been using them for a very long time. And honestly, I love them. I think the design... Have we broken that? No one needs to know. They always seem to strike a very nice balance between aesthetics and performance. And obviously there are going to be different SKUs, so if you don't want to go for the most expensive one, then you can buy a card that's slightly smaller, that won't have the same sort of thermal capacity, might run slightly louder and slightly warmer, but in terms of gaming performance, probably won't be massively different, to be honest with you. We can do a little peel for the camera look, and you can see we have our PCI Gen 5 connector on the top, GeForce logo, a little bit of RGB, 3 fans that should be brilliant for cooling, and hopefully a very quiet gaming PC. The backplate is pretty solid. We've got the MSI logo here, actually a little bit of pass-through as well to allow the air to go through for better cooling. And then in terms of I/O, we've got 3 display ports here, which is going to be great if you have like a triple monitor setup, alongside an HDMI 2.1 as well. So this will do 4K, 120 Hz, variable refresh rate, HDR, the works. But let's put this down for a second, because clearly I can't be trusted with nice things. And then we can take this opportunity to actually begin building our system. And as always, I'm going to start by building on top of the motherboard. This is one from MSI. It's the MPG B650 Carbon Wi-Fi. Just like the graphics cards, I've been using MSI motherboards for years, and I have to say I really like them. They do tend to be very quick to boot as well in my experience, which is always a little bonus. But this being a B650 motherboard is probably the way I would go and recommend to most people if you're building a gaming rig. An upgrade that all gamers might actually want to consider if you're going for longevity is to go for B650E, the E standing for extreme. This means means that this top slot would actually support PCI Generation 5 16X, which essentially means that future graphics cards that take advantage of this will work on this motherboard at full speed. But I think we're probably a few years out before you even need to worry about that at all, and as we're not really properly utilizing all of the bandwidth on Gen 4 at the moment, maybe on like the top end 4090, it's extra expense that again you might not actually need. Now let's get really interesting for a second and actually talk about our CPU, because the one we're using here is the Ryzen 5 7600, and this is pretty much the cheapest chip you can go for if you're going for AM5 and you want really high-end gaming performance. This should be fine for most 4K gamers, but the one I'd actually probably recommend pairing with this still actually isn't out yet. It's a couple of weeks away, is the Ryzen 7800 X3D, and that is going to give you ridiculous performance at 1440p, 4K, everything. But I thought, as it's not here yet, rather than use like a 7900X that isn't really going to be that representative because you'd go for the 3D version, how about we go for this and see what sort of bottlenecking we get? So if you are in the position where you want to save yourself some money and 6 cores is absolutely fine for you and you're just playing, like I say, at 4K, then maybe this is going to be sufficient. Maybe you don't need to make the upgrade. It is a 4070 Ti, it's not as powerful as a 4090. I'm going to be interested to see. Let's open up our top slot, reveal our brand new AM5 socket and drop the 7600 into place, lower down the socket. Then we can add in our RAM, and this is some stuff that MSI actually sent out as well. This is from Kingston. It is their Fury RGB, and this is running at 5600 megahertz. So not the absolute fastest you can go for, but if you actually pay attention to memory speeds, you can find my full video in the top right corner of your screen, then it doesn't really make too much difference, to be honest with you, at all. Pretty much anything over about 5200 is going to be the sweet spot when it comes to price to performance. Let's just pop that into place. Then we can pick up our SSD, and again, this is all about price to performance. This is the Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus. This is 1 terabyte, which is pretty much the minimum you need really for a gaming PC these days. The games are getting so big. The only thing I'll say against this is the fact that offers on SSDs are literally changing all the time, and you might be able to get one that's even faster than this at a lower price. It just depends when you're buying, basically. So typically with SSDs, get the best one you can that's on sale. Oh, this is new. Is this a completely toolless SSD bay? Why don't they all do this? I've seen so many saying, oh, we're toolless, but you still need a screwdriver. This is actually toolless. Yes, MSI. You got the PC Centric approval there. That is pretty naughty. Look, you got the clip, you remove this, and then in theory, you just lower these screws into the holder, give it a push, bang. Toolless, baby. Woo! I think the motherboard is now ready to go in, which means that we do need to get this PCIe extension out. Are we going to be lazy? Are we going to leave this in? Yes. Because in theory, all we need to do is lower this down flat, pick up our motherboard, and just gently line this up with the hole. Yeah, that's fine actually. Take the cover off the riser, remove the screw holding the bracket in, insert this into place, screw that back down, screw the motherboard down into the standoffs, and then we can stand it up and have a look at our early creation. I think this is going to look banging. Picture it. Vertical GPU, fans everywhere, all-in-one liquid cooling. Oh yeah. And of course, speak of the devil and he shall appear. Let's add some fans in, and I've gone for ones that are not cheap, but they're the cheaper of the ones you can buy pretty much if you're going to go for Corsair fans. These are the AF 120 RGB Elites in white, and I've gone for these pretty much because we've also gone for this cooler. These do have more high-end ML Elite fans, I think, but they do come with a controller, so all of this, including the RGB and the actual fan speed, will be able to be controlled in iCUE in the desktop, which I think is the best way of doing it. This is very expensive. If you can get it on sale, brilliant, but I mean, if you want to save some money, like, don't get this, get like an air cooler, something way cheaper. But as I really do want to do this case justice, I think both of these together are going to be slick. Let's grab our fans out of the box. We'll then remove the one that comes as standard from the rear, and then of course replace that with our brand new Corsair AF. I'll also note that this is a 120. If you do want to use a 140, it's not supported on the back. Not even up top actually. 120s only. I think we're also going to put the other two here as an intake. They don't look quite as nice, but obviously airflow has to come first, right? The sides take 140s. If you want to do a 280, you can put it here. Only thing I'm thinking now is white cables are going to be harder to manage. Maybe I can put them in this little hole through here, just to try and make it as neat and tidy as possible. Obviously you want white fans to have white cables, because usually you put it in an all white case. But if you're doing black and white, a little bit more tricky. Cooler next though, and as I say, we're using the H150i, and we're going to put this at the top. Pretty standard formation really. These have become as much of a fashion item as they have for practicality. I mean, the exact chip that we're using here doesn't need this whatsoever as 7600, but if you're going for that 7800X 3D, then it's not a bad idea. But if you went for like a 240 or something, it wouldn't make the case look as good as it could. Here we have, look, our white fans, but with black cables. Make your mind up, Corsair. Let's do our little test fit. So I swear it supports the 360. This is why I exist, so you don't make silly mistakes. The amount of times I've moved this blimmin' fan now, for goodness sake. I think that won't work. We might have to go without the rear. So what I would actually recommend that you do is to get two 140s for the sides, rather than a 3-pack, because if you don't need this one, what's the point of going for the 3-pack? Let's pop the fans on front so that they're actually blowing into the radiator so that this becomes an exhaust. Screw them into place. And at this stage, you might think you're ready to actually put this inside your system, but you'd be wrong, because we don't have much clearance at the top. So we've got to make sure that we do actually plug in our power to the top of the motherboard. Otherwise, we just won't be able to get it in a little bit later. And so now is the time to deploy our secret weapon. This transforms your PC into something that looks decent, into something that looks genuinely incredible. And the irony is, it's not the RGB, and it is also very affordable. This is a CX750X RGB, and the reason this is so good is because the cables on this thing that come with it as standard look incredible. Look at this! Proper white cables on a more budget-friendly power supply. Like, all of these almost look as if ones you could upgrade to from other rigs. Like, obviously they're not custom braided and they're not gonna look as good as the ones you get from like Cable Mod or something. But for the money, they're pretty incredible, especially in a white build. But let's find the ones that we want. Plug this in right at the top and then feed the cable through to the other side. Grab all of these cables and bundle them together. This is by far the worst thing about RGB coolers. Feed that through to the back and then gently raise this whole thing whilst pulling those cables through. Add a couple of screws to stop it falling down. Oh, sigh of relief. And then you can fit it down with the washers and the screws. Now we can prepare the pump head, which starts by grabbing the AMD hardware out of the box. It is labeled. Just remove this Intel bracket, and then replace it with the AMD version. If you're wondering about thermal paste, it comes pre-applied, but obviously if you're buying this used or using it again, you need to add your own. Remove the default AM5 mounting hardware with the 4 screws and these little plastic covers, and then add the screws labeled AM4. Use the same holes as the screws that you've just removed. And then, in theory, we should be ready to just drop this into place. There we go. Nice solid push and secure it down. Plug in the dummy fan speed to the header on the motherboard, and then this big cable routes through to the back to plug in to the cooler controller. This cooler does also come with 2 different faceplates, and I'm going to swap this out for the other one to make it look a little bit more unique, I suppose. As you can see, there's not a massive difference between the two, but this has a few more lines cut out for a little bit more RGB, whereas this is going to be more diffused. Right, cooler's in. That took blimmin' ages. Oh, we're not even done actually. We're not even done. We've got to plug in the controller. At least half of this build has purely just been radiators and fans. I hate radiators, man. I hate radiators. Fortunately, at least, these are very easy to install, and they are one of the better systems out there, as everything plugs into this rather than sort of daisy chaining everywhere. We need to grab our little pump head, and we plug this into the back. Then we need to plug in our RGB. Don't worry too much about the order because you can reassign these in IQ. Didn't used to be the case, but it is now. Then you can plug your fans in to the other side. Grab the 3M tape that comes in the box and peel this off, and then you can stick it down somewhere on your chassis. But let's finish this off by grabbing all of our case connections and plug them into the motherboard. You know the drill by now. USB-C is up here. Below that, you've got the USB 3.0, HD audio, bottom left, then finally power, reset. It's all combined into one that says front panel, and this connects at the bottom right. I think we're now ready for a fun bit. Usually I'd do the power supply next, but I need something for me. We're gonna do this. This is the graphics card. We have our vertical GPU mount. We'll remove the protective cover. We'll remove the expansion slot covers, and then we can pick up our graphics card and finally get this into our rig. There we go. And then give it a good push home and you're in. But let's screw this down into place so that it's secure. And then we can move on to the final component, the power supply. That, of course, we have pretty much all ready to go. We do need some extra cables, though. We've got our RGB, some SATA, ATX, but then we have one final secret weapon, also from Corsair. This is a 12-volt high-power PCI Gen 5 cable. And if you look at that, it's in white. Let's get all of these cables plugged in. This should then just slide in. Let's screw the power supply in. You know what? I'm actually not very impressed with this cable management at all. Look at what it looks like. I know if I spent a couple of hours, maybe not that long, but an hour to get this looking really nice and pristine, it could be done because there are tie down points and things, but there are no channels here pretty much at all. So this is all sort of makeshift. And worse yet, don't forget you've got this fan down the bottom and there's no guard on it. So you've got all of this space here that I'd usually use for sort of stuffing cables and things. But at the moment, there's nothing to actually stop all of these cables going into the fan other than the cable management that you can't really very easily do. So actually, I would say this has not been the best building experience when it comes to cable management at all. But anyway, enough moaning. Just a couple of cables to go and we are done. So let's plug in our Gen 5 cable at the top. And then finally, the last piece of the puzzle is just this ATX connection that's below this fan header that we've used for the bottom fan. And then I think we are actually done. What do you make of the rig? I think there are some improvements that can be done, but actually I think this is going to stand out and look quite different in quite a saturated marketplace. Because I mean, let's be honest, like white builds look super cool, but they're very hard to do to get everything white and then, well, everything is white. I like to have a little bit more going on in my rig. I'm excited to get this turned on now. Let's do it. Let's grab our monitor, our PC Centric mouse mat, link is located down below, our display cable, power, and we are ready. Where's the power button? Professional as always, Centric. Let's go. Oh, that's promising. That's promising. It was doing the memory training. Boom. Hooray, it's Monday the 5th of December. I mean, that joke doesn't work if you're watching this video like months in advance. It's actually March. That's what my watch tells me. Give me a couple of hours to get this thing updated, loads of games on this, and we'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, we made it. Are you ready for not only the benchmarking, but the peel? No! Why? That has honestly got to be the worst peel I've ever done in my life. It looks pretty slick though, right? If we rotate this around so you can see, is this less fish tank than the Y60? I don't know. I'm also a little bit umming and ahhing about whether the white fans actually make sense. I think I like them at the top, but maybe at the side they draw a bit too much attention. So unless you're going for a specific white graphics card, maybe make those black fans as well. But I do think it works at the top. Makes it look a little bit more edgy. But anyway, shall we press on and get gaming with some Hogwarts Legacy? And let's have a look at our settings, shall we? We do have DLSS. We'll change this down to balanced, as this is a 4070 Ti. Frame generation we will leave on. Oh, frame rate, I think we want uncapped, please. And then everything else we will leave at ultra, but for now we'll leave ray tracing off. And in terms of predictions, I'm guessing about 130 frames a second. I am honestly a genius. Like, genuinely, that is not a stunt. I hadn't planned that. This is the first time I've seen this running on this. That's not too shabby, isn't it? I mean, the game looks pretty darn tasty. It's a really good looking game, even though like some of the characters sometimes look a little bit weird and the animations are slightly off. For a game of this sort of size, I think it's very, very impressive actually, especially from a technical sort of perspective. But yeah, we're getting about 100 to 130 frames a second. We do get some dips. This is more the game rather than the system. I've seen this quite a lot. But interestingly, having a look at that GPU utilization, you can see it does drop ever so slightly from time to time. It is at 97, 98% a lot of the time, but in certain areas it will drop near the 90% mark. And this is something that you probably will be able to get rid of if you do upgrade to that 3D processor, which is probably what I'd recommend. But it does go to show that even in one of the most CPU demanding titles, the Ryzen 5 7600 definitely holds its own. But let's up the ante a little bit and turn all of the ray tracing on, and we'll set this to ultra. Restart the game. Oh, for goodness sake. And then why do we need to do the shaders again? It's the same system. Future Marcus here reporting that I think I did a misclick and we've actually got this running in DLSS performance mode. But it's okay, we're here, we're in the exact same spot, and you can see we have lost a fair old chunk of FPS, maybe about 30, 35 or so. The game does actually look noticeably better though, especially the lighting. You can notice it's just a fair bit more realistic. Whether it's going to make a massive difference to you, probably not, but in a game like this where you don't actually specifically need 130 frames a second, I would definitely turn some, if not all of the ray tracing on. Don't forget you can just lower it down a little bit. And with DLSS 3.0, it does enable you to actually enable it without having too much of a compromise. But let's press on to a multiplayer title now, with some Fortnite. And this is running in 4K with DLSS and DirectX 12 with everything turned up to max with ray tracing off. And as you can see, the frame rate isn't actually particularly crazy. I think this game's got more and more demanding. It's a bit of a weird one because it's a multiplayer title, so I wouldn't actually turn a lot of the settings up. But because it's Epic and they want to sort of show off their new engine, they actually let you do it because there's loads of settings you can turn up. So it's quite cool to be able to get the option. And I mean, 74 frames a second is not exactly bad. It's still very smooth and better than you'll get in a lot of consoles. But obviously you probably want something a little bit higher if you're going to play properly competitively. I mean, the first setting we can actually turn down is the DLSS from quality to maybe even performance mode. Oh, boom, that's got one. And as you can see, the performance is a whole lot better with around about 100 to 120 frames a second now. And in terms of image quality, it's a little bit softer, but genuinely it's really hard to actually notice a difference, especially in a game like Fortnite when you're sort of running around so much. This is a beautiful game though. I mean, look at it. I haven't really played this since they've done the Unreal 5 engine update, and I've got to admit, it does look the nuts. Let's take this to a whole new level though, and just out of interest, we will enable ray tracing. So we go into the options, and somewhere we will find our ray tracing options, which is down here as Lumen. We'll turn on hardware ray tracing, hit apply, and then we'll see what will probably be a very big drop in performance. We went from 110 to pretty much cutting it in half, around about 55 to 65 frames a second. And obviously, yes, it now does look even better. But again, this is Fortnite. It's not really worth playing with these settings. Maybe in the future when we've got even more powerful graphics cards, but I mean, as a demo, it's not bad. Can I actually pop someone with these settings? That would be nice, wouldn't it? Yes, we can. Thank you very much. Let's try and actually optimize our settings though. Ray tracing is obviously going to go. We'll leave view distance and textures at epic, but then everything else we can turn down a little bit, maybe to high or medium. Let's do high for now. We change DLSS to balanced, and then we run this in 1440p mode. And as you can see, our frame rate has skyrocketed to anywhere really between 160 and 200 frames a second, depending on where you are in the game. This is a lot better. This is gonna let you get like a high-end 1440p, 165 Hz monitor and properly saturate it. This is definitely how I would choose to play if I was gonna be playing Fortnite regularly on the competitive side of things. I've now turned the DLSS back to quality mode because we were hitting an ever so slight CPU bottleneck. If you do want to play Fortnite, this is a pretty magical system to play it on. And in terms of noise levels, by the way, like literally nothing. Oh no! We were 60 degrees on both the GPU and the CPU. That's your fault, that is. Oh, I want to know about the temperatures and the noise. Look what you've done. You've ruined my day. Thank you. Let us press on from the cheery, sunny Fortnite to something a whole lot more depressing. Some Returnal, a game I've literally just finished last night at midnight. I absolutely loved it. I'm keep playing it to unlock pretty much everything, all of the story, all of the secrets. And at the moment, I've got this running at absolute max settings at 4K, but with DLSS set to the performance mode. And as you can see, we're getting around about 100 frames a second or so here. But this is a game that is incredibly like particle effect heavy. I was going to say particle effecty, but that doesn't really make any sense. So it is going to depend where you are in the game, and some of the later areas are actually pretty horrible when it comes to running smoothly. You will get a bit of stutter from time to time. It's just the game, unfortunately. There's not too much that you can do about that. And to be frank, it didn't really bother me anyway. It's a little bit of stutter. It was nowhere near as bad as you had in Dead Space. And as I say, it's a game I really enjoyed. And actually, this 4070 Ti is running this remarkably well. 100 frames a second is probably about right. I mean, 60 with a controller will be fine. But if you are using a mouse and keyboard, you do need a lot of precision really to be able to play this game at its absolute best, even though it's a single player title. So if you can get this over 100 frames a second, that would be advisable, I think it's fair to say. But bear in mind we're running this with ray tracing at absolute max settings. I think getting 100 frames a second is pretty spot on actually. Genuinely highly recommended. Just out of interest, what happens if we actually turn the ray tracing off and lower this down to 1440p? And what difference does that make? Not actually too much, because as expected we are starting to get a little bit of a bottleneck on that CPU. Again, you can expect to get better performance if you upgrade this to the 3D processor, but actually I think you'll agree that it's not made too much of a difference really. That 7600 is very, very strong, and unless you specifically want like over 150 frames a second in every game that you play, it's not really too much of a concern, even in the CPU heavy titles that we've tested. But I mean, look, we are wasting about 20% of our GPU right now. So bear this in mind. Let's press on to the strategy game in our test. This is also pretty new. This is Company Heroes 3, came out a few weeks ago. We've discussed this on the channel already. It's good, but whether you need to pay full price for it, yeah, I'd probably wait a couple of weeks or a few months unless all of your friends are actually playing it now, because it's not too dissimilar to the others. But still, it's actually surprisingly hard to run. I'm not entirely sure why. There are only 3 real settings you can change, and we've got everything set to max, so this is the highest preset. And as you can see, we're currently getting around about 120 to 130 frames a second at 4K. There's not any DLSS, FSR, XeSS, anything here. It's all pure rendering that I know loads of people actually love in the comments. So yes, it's not 200 frames a second, but obviously with a game like this, it really doesn't matter at all. It still feels super smooth, the PC runs cool and quiet next to you, and all in all, it's going to give you a pretty lush gameplay experience. In fact, what happens if we turn this down to 1440? And I wasn't joking about the settings, look, this is literally it. And would you look at that, look, now we are getting 200 frames a second. So for those of you that were in the comments demanding 200 frames a second in Company Heroes, you can relax now. It's fine. Just turn it down to 1440p and you can do it. It's nice to see that the CPU isn't actually holding us back here either, which is nice. 95% utilization. This is running really, really well. So there we are, our RTX 4070 Ti 7600 system. All in all, actually, I think this is very well paired. Despite the fact that we're only running a 7600 CPU, the whole system has fared brilliantly at pretty much everything that we can throw at it. The obvious upgrade that we've made time and time again is to go for that 3D CPU, but that is going to add extra cost. Probably an extra 200 quid or so, depending on when and I suppose where you get it from. So that's not exactly a cheap upgrade. You could maybe get the 7600 for now, take the cooler out, go for something a lot more smaller, maybe an airflow sort of style thing, and you would save yourself quite a lot of money and be getting the exact same performance. The case overall is recommended if you really like the look. I'm not a fan of the cable management, but it's workable, you just have to spend a little bit more time doing it, and it does stand out and still look quite unique. The only other thing I think I'd change actually about the chassis is just to make it ever so slightly taller so you can actually fit a rear fan, because that is quite annoying if you go for a 360 that you are going to have to go with this, but it's not really going to make any difference to thermals as we saw with both 60 degrees on both components, so I think that's a big win. But all in all, I'm really happy with it. I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on this though. What do you make of the case, the performance, the graphics? Would you upgrade the CPU? Let me know, I'd love to hear from you. Absolutely smash the like button if you've enjoyed this, get yourself subscribed, and of course if you do want to check out current pricing on anything featured in this video, you can find it linked down below with my Amazon affiliate links. But thank you so much for watching this video, I'll catch you in the next one.